Mr. Bean is internationally famous for being possibly the most terrible driver to ever be allowed near a Mini, but away from the cameras he was living an entirely different life. This is the story of incredible cars, podiums and crashes in the surprisingly serious racing career of Rowan Atkinson. Now, there's an obvious temptation when talking about Rowan Atkinson and cars. You immediately think of his bumbling, clumsy Mr. Bean character. But this does a disservice to the technically minded and smart man that he actually is. Because before becoming one of Britain's most recognised comedians, Atkinson studied engineering at Newcastle University and Queen's College in Oxford. In other words, he had an engineer's brain long before he had Mr. Bean's face. And the same could be said of his love of cars. He was fascinated by them from a very young age. After leaving education, Rowan decided to focus on his acting career, and by the 1980s, his spells in the likes of Not the 9 O'Clock News and Blackadder were already turning him into a famous face. And naturally, when a man who loves cars starts making money, he likes to spend that money on cars. So in the mid-1980s, he started entering races, like ones in the Renault 5 Turbo UK Cup. It was a small one-make series and the cars were simple but also small, light and turbocharged. It had a bizarre mix of experienced amateur racers, ambitious professionals and business people, but as a championship it was genuinely considered a serious and competitive national series. There's no evidence to say that Atkinson set the world on fire with Schumacher-like performances, but he did make repeated appearances and demonstrated that this wasn't just a publicity stunt. He genuinely just wanted to race. And soon, Atkinson wanted to get himself involved with much more powerful machines. But before I go on, if you're enjoying this video, please do give the like button a quick click, it really does help. And so we introduce Aston Martin, a company that Rowan Atkinson has had a long association with. One of the most striking cars that Atkinson raced was an Aston Martin V8 Zagato. It was a pretty odd looking machine, but it was definitely a beast in terms of performance. Atkinson's car was prepared for competition and used in Aston Martin Owners Club racing, so this one had been developed even further into a serious racing machine. But in July 2001, Atkinson crashed heavily at Croft Circuit. This was a man with a massive acting career to think about, and a bad injury could be disastrous. But thankfully he escaped without harm. The car, however, was less fine. You'd think this might have put him off, but he knew the risks and continued anyway, which takes us to the famous Goodwood Motor Circuit. Proper racing at Goodwood had stopped since 1966, but in 1998 a new event called the Goodwood Revival brought motor racing back to the track. The Revival is a fantastic event where classic cars compete across the weekend, while the venue is packed with crowds in vintage clothing and all manner of classic shops and displays. Rowan Atkinson competed in the first Goodwood Revival in 1998 in an Aston Martin DB2, having also been present at the first Goodwood Festival of Speed in 1993. And over the following years, Atkinson had become a familiar presence on the grid, racing everything from Aston Martins to small British saloons and enormous American machinery. It's a uniquely popular event that attracts the top drivers in Formula 1, touring cars, NASCAR and many more, all mixed in with a grid of enthusiasts and celebrities like Rowan. Of all the cars Rowan Atkinson has raced at Goodwood, one of the most memorable is his 1964 Ford Falcon Sprint. By American standards, the Falcon was a relatively compact car, but by European standards it looked like a detached bungalow with a V8. Atkinson's pale blue racing Falcon became a regular sight at Goodwood and other historic meetings. It was powerful, noisy and dramatic. Through the corners it leaned heavily on its tyres, and Goodwood affectionately referred to the car as Goliath. It raced not only at Goodwood but at venues like Silverstone, Snetterton and even in Belgium. It was a great sight. Mr. Bean, so famously known for messing around in a tiny Mini, was now manhandling this beast at top speed against legendary drivers. It also produced one of the most dramatic accidents of his racing career. At the 2014 Goodwood Revival, a car ahead lost control and obstructed the track. With nowhere to go, Atkinson hit him with great force. Neither Atkinson nor the other driver was seriously injured, but the Falcon's race was over. It was another reminder that a celebrity racing isn't just a novelty, the consequences are genuine, because being rich and famous doesn't make your crashes hurt any less, or the barriers less solid. So once again Atkinson brushed it off and continued racing, which again showed he had a genuine passion for the sport. Of all the cars that Rowan Atkinson has raced, none have stuck around quite like the Jaguar Mark 7. He bought it at an auction in 2001 more on a whim than a plan, and it isn't usually the type of car that people buy when they're looking for a racing car. It's an enormous lump on wheels, but under the bonnet sits an immense 3.4 litre engine. For the following few years, Atkinson shared it alongside motorsport royalty in the form of Sterling Moss, and he's continued to race it at Goodwood almost every year since. It's become a fixture of the revival, the great lumbering saloon sliding around corners. So with all these exploits, was he actually fast? Let's be honest here, Rowan Atkinson isn't someone who's going to make it to Formula 1. But by the time of his later Goodwood appearances, he did have decades of racing experience. And there was more evidence of this in 2011 when he appeared on Top Gear as the star in a reasonably priced car. Which, if you haven't seen it, is a segment on the show where celebrities set lap times in a standard road car. And on his episode, his lap time placed him at the top of the leaderboard at the time. Despite Matt LeBlanc eventually beating his time by 1/10 of a second, it absolutely demonstrated that he was a quick driver. Which brings us onto the car that transformed Rowan Atkinson's motoring life into headline news. The McLaren F1, regarded by some as the ultimate road car, especially when it was first released. It's a truly astonishing machine which in 1998 achieved a top speed of 240 miles per hour. Even a few decades later, that figure is still incredible. Atkinson brought his McLaren in 1997 for around £640,000. And while so many McLaren F1s became investment objects, Atkinson was a car fanatic, so he drove his everywhere, even for day-to-day errands. He even said that he took his children in it on holiday to Cornwall. So while other F1 owners were doing everything to protect them from weather and traffic and everything possible that could cause damage, Atkinson's McLaren F1 stood out for having a really high mileage. But on Thursday the 4th of August in 2011, Atkinson was driving his F1 on a wet road in Cambridgeshire at around 7:30 in the evening. Reports say that the car spun, struck a tree and burst into flames. No other car was believed to have been involved. Atkinson managed to climb out of the wreckage himself and he was quickly taken to hospital with a shoulder injury. The following day, photographs of the wrecked McLaren appeared across newspapers and television everywhere. It had suffered enormous damage, yet the central carbon structure had protected its driver. For many cars, this would have undoubtedly been the end. The wreckage would be swept up and crushed and turned into a washing machine or something. But this was a McLaren F1, a truly historic machine. The damaged car was returned to McLaren and technicians painstakingly rebuilt it. This wasn't a standard repair. With a McLaren F1 there aren't spare parts sitting around in your local garage. The restoration reportedly took almost a year and cost a whopping £910,000. Newspapers described it as one of the largest private motor insurance repair payouts in Britain. And it seems like a massive figure, but when you consider that Atkinson eventually sold the car a few years later for a figure rumoured to be around £8 million, it actually seems like a pretty good decision to repair it at that cost. And beyond that McLaren F1, his car collection is unbelievable, with Rolls Royces, Bentleys, Aston Martins and many others. Even into his 60s and 70s, Rowan Atkinson has continued to race. By this point, he has nothing left to prove in terms of his acting career, but he's still pursuing his passion. At the age of 67, he scored his first ever podium at a Goodwood meeting in his trusty Jaguar. It was a brilliant personal achievement. So, next time you see a clip of Mr. Bean bumbling around in his Mini, just remember, the real Mr. Bean is a racer. If you enjoyed this video, check out the one on screen about the Grand Prix that might have been rigged for millions.